and convey the value of a whole sector that, through the market leaders, can be an important evidence for all the others. So thanks, President. Now I leave the floor to the next speaker by Professor Mugelli, President of the Italian Drugs Society. Thanks to him. And allow me to say that we have one goal from my point of view. MDMS devices are not drugs. So allow me for being so simple. But let us move from this prerequisite, from this assumption. But let us try to work together with the drug experts to demonstrate this and to go on. Thank you, President. Thank you. I will not go away after your introduction. I will stay. So, actually, we work together, and we have to recall that just a few days ago, we have signed an agreement of cooperation between the Italian Pharmacology Association and Confindustria Medical Devices, dispositivi medici, because I think that that's the right context in which to work. I will briefly tell you why pharmacologists, as a society, activated themselves in the recent past for this. We have examples of pharmacologists who worked in this sector in a very proactive way. So, as Salvatore said, despite we work in the only pediatric ethical committee, that's a task on excellence that is very important, I also mentioned further examples to make this kind of reasoning with you. This slide is very well known to everyone. It shows how... Can I have a pointer? Anyway, it's not important. So with the increase of aging, there's a consequent increase of multimorbidity with number of pathologies that occur with the aging process. So this leads, through the use of guidelines for single pathologies, to an incredible number of treatments that, especially in the elderlies, can lead to the figures that you can see in this slide, which are quite stunning. Number of drugs which are taken by the patient these are prescribed according to specific guidelines for each individual treatment. Of course, this trend is very important for us as pharmacologists. I don't want to get into the polemical attitude of Professor Federini, but I think we have to work together. So, all in all, according to the guidelines on drugs, I would like to stress this survey performed by the UK shows that there is a high use of products that are not drugs. And here we can see just a few indicated in this slide. So substances, products with natural origin, supplements. And in the following slide, we can see other products. So, of course, I don't want to go into details. It's not the right venue, but I'd like just to provide you with an information that you probably all know. That's UK, but it's exactly what is happening in Italy. The elderlies are using natural medicinal products and dietary supplements with prescription drugs to manage chronic conditions and to maintain health. That's the concept for which these are used. This is not studied properly. We do not have underpinning studies that actually evaluate precisely what Salvatore was saying beforehand. No pragmatic or observational studies are carried out. So the combined use of these products, non-drugs, is quite common in the UK. And the important figure is that one citizen out of three who uses these products is at risk of potential herb drug or supplement drug interactions that can be in certain cases dangerous. So an estimate was done, and roughly 1.3 million older adults in the UK are at risk of at least one potential interaction that could be clinically relevant. So it's clear that we, as pharmacologists, we live through this problem. I was yesterday at the national context of the Italian Geriatric Society. This was one of the themes to optimize treatments. So what we are interested in is the evidence, as Salvatore was saying beforehand, and you know better than myself, of course, that evidence for many of the substances that I've shown on the previous slides are lacking. So this is the regulation for supplements whose introduction on the market goes through a notification procedure, but this procedure has nothing to do with the possibility of these nutrients to have effects for maintaining the health in the previous conditions. Same goes perhaps for traditional medicines or medicinal products. These are monographies or monographs, but if we look at PK data or pharmacodynamic data, these are not requested for two reasons probably. These are not required because they cannot be determined, and probably because that's not interest in providing this data. But from the point of view of the patient, that's a big limitation in terms of the suitability of use. So the new regulation, as Salvatore was saying, and as you all said, stands for a great opportunity from this viewpoint, because all in all, it's putting us in the conditions to obtain information, more specifically for medical devices made of substances, for an assessment of risk-benefit ratios. It requires clinical evidence, and of course, it envisages a discussion with regulators, which is extremely interesting. At a glance, without reading all this, you know it very well, if on the one hand, on the left, we have drugs or medicinal products, you can say that these have an action on the pathology to treat or prevent a disease which goes through a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic action. On the other hand, medical devices, more specifically the ones we're referring to, can treat or mitigate, alleviate the disease through mechanisms which are neither pharmacological, nor immunological, nor metabolic. So all this, and that's the main reason for which pharmacology somehow activated itself, as I said, it's a very important challenge. It's an intellectual challenge that in some cases is relatively simple. If we want, here are some examples from a publication by Marco Racchi, who is here in this room. Later on, if you need further explanations, you can turn to him. These are all actions of substances that in some cases are considered as drugs, but acting with non-pharmacological mechanisms. So this could perfectly belong to the category of medical devices. The regulation, what is it stating? It declares that these substances or its metabolical products can be are absorbed systemically by the human body to obtain the intended purpose. So for us as pharmacologists, it's a shift of paradigm. Therapeutical effect for us, it was a pharmacological effect. Now we have to reason differently, and that's the innovation behind those who structured this system. As the MP was saying, it's the excellency of Italy that was brought forth at European level within the scope of a development of the system Italy, but also, of course, engaging the European citizens, so paying attention to European citizens, as you said. So it's an opportunity where the pharmacologists can have a role. As Salvatore hinted at the first role, so that's the definition of the pharmacological mode of action. So we have to rethink all this. We have to open up our minds to something that was not expected in the past. It was not considered yet. And in the latest pharmacological congress, where I moved from the president to past president position last week, we organized a conference in which the keynote speech was Luigi Naldini, and he made us understand what's the perspective of important diseases with gene therapy. The last speech was by Guido Rasi, talking about the rules in the world of drugs at the EMA level from here to 2025. And so, in this span of time, of course, medical devices will come into the scene. So treated not as drugs, but as something that is going to become quite interesting as a classification, because these medical devices made of substances shall document through the studies that Salvatore has shown to you the therapeutical effects. What kind of pathology is to be treated? It's a functional pathology or minor pathology, but these are very important. You can recall the previous slide on disabilities that are increasing during the aging process, and all the issues related to the change in the healthcare setting. So these are all important implications. So what is there in this black box, which is different from the black box that was introduced by Salvatore? Anyway, it's a black box where maybe there are ways to or pattern to analyze, like the system biology, or some of the companies that were mentioned today. They're working in this new trend. So it's something in which us as pharmacologists want and absolutely have to play a role. And we are here to demonstrate the interest of pharmacology, to open up its mind and to move in a direction that is in the interest of the patient. Because eventually, of course, in the end, the patient needs better known treatments, less invasive on health, less impacting on health in a negative sense, and this could all benefit to the finance of the country and maybe you deal also with the environment, so also for the environment, because the environmental impact of drugs, of course, stands for an important issue that we have to take into account today. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie professore. Al termine di questa
Thanks. At the end of this session, in which there will be no break, I would like to make further remarks on these interventions. Needless to say, the interaction between the pharmacological component and the role of medical devices, the input they can provide, it's very important for quality, most of all. Please, goodbye, MP. So mainly as for quality of care, and also for oncological patients who have many side effects, also as it was said, older adult patients who have comorbidities. So this integration vis-à-vis the quality of life of patients is an element that is increasingly important to be considered. Secondly, as we hinted at, the impact of pharmacological treatments, especially for antibiotics. It has an impact on antibiotic resistance, environmental impact. So medical devices can be good integration compared to more invasive interventions, and anyway can be used especially in the phase of prevention or support in the first steps of any pathology. A second topic that was not treated, but is due to my previous experience, is the whole sector of the relation between animals and human beings. So these devices today are authorized, especially in the human medical sector, but are used also in the veterinary sector. So there are no specific rules in this regard, both as regards pets, who, as you well know, have synergy with the human beings' lives, and same with the sector again of antibiotic resistance. There's a great impact, big impact, and also for food productions. We referred to the quality of Italian food products. Today, having more natural products that could allow healthier productions closer to the expectations of the consumers is extremely important. We have to think that the quality of productions will be increasingly determinant in the choice of consumers from the point of view of their nutrition. So in this first phase, I would say that there are certain aspects that with the implementation of the new regulation shall be considered. Finally, and of course, Mrs. Marletta is going to talk about this, is the adjustment of the administration from this point of view. So having a system made up of the ministries and the high institutes and the vigilance bodies that must be consistent with these objectives, because beyond the regulation, of course, any single detail has to be taken into account in order to avoid problems. So we hope that the Italian administration, as it did over the last years, might be, on the one hand, the watchdog of the suitable implementation of the regulation, so the right separation between manufacturing and citizens, and could, on the other hand, positively support also the development of this sector. Now I leave the floor to my co-chair, co-moderator, because right now I have to decide how to move on. So we have a connection with Mr. D'Acunto of the Commission. So this connection, unfortunately, is not ready yet. So a call to the floor, Mrs. Marletta, who doesn't need to be introduced. We are right in line with the timeline. So in the end, we will have a Q&A discussion, and this is very important as a qualifying aspect of this session. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for providing me this opportunity. For me, it's always wonderful to talk about the effort that we played on medical devices, and how over this recent years I strongly believed in this sector. This morning at breakfast, I was talking about my 13 years in this field of drugs, but it's more than 20 years of experience on medical devices. So I have boasted a certain level of expertise for many years now. I've been working, firmly believing in this sector of medical devices, also for the system Italy. So with a special focus dedicated on to Italy. Mrs. Cellona and Mr. Marabelli are, for me, persons with whom for years I've been sharing the interest, as we talked a lot together, many times. More specifically, MDMS, made of substances, and that's the title of this event, stand for an opportunity of innovation in healthcare. I really believe in this. I believed in this since the very beginning, when at the times, yes, we strongly believed in this together, jointly, as Mr. Marabella is saying. You're right. We talked a lot about this many times. And by the adoption in Italy of medical devices, with Professor Buzzofero and Mrs. Marqualdi, who is here right now. I can remember Mrs. Gramiccione, the notified body, the High Institute for Health, which had history even before the ministry as a competent authority. It was set up as the first Italian notified body. It boasts a long history on medical devices made of substances. More specifically, the certification of MDMS in Italy has become really a way to characterize expertise at the international level. There are about 700 industries producing this kind of devices, and the attention is such that it, as Fernanda will say, it accounts for 28% of market products. So this means that there is a strong interest for these substances, and that consistently with the existing rules, a certification is possible. So what is happening? We, as Italians, as competent authority, we felt in the 6 months of the Italian presidency that we had to deal with certain difficulties in the adoption of the new regulation or directive on medical devices. And so, precisely on that occasion, we were the first to draft the book, the famous book that was supposed to adopt all the changes, to transpose all the changes of this 20-year-old 9342 directive. We did that with lots of devotion, and we started this journey on MDMS. And today, at the EU level, we are witnessing a strange reverse trend towards these products. That's the concept that states that many of these products shall become drugs. As Fernanda said, it's not conceivable to me. There are MDMS products that no one, and this could be really actually the evidence, that cannot be registered as drugs. I've been in this sector for 13 years, and I know that there are some products that someone would like to be drugs, but that could never overcome a pharmacological scrutiny and be authorized as drugs. Then there are specifically interesting products like Cranberry and now Manos, which instead was at the center of the attention and were eliminated, so to say, and then some new concepts were reintroduced to understand what was the extent of use of these substances and what was the demand to have these products on the market and which were the difficulties to set up a pharmacological dossier. And this could not be feasible. So, simply put, we worked on this regulation, on Rule 21. And if I can have the slides. We pioneered as Italy's system. We fully adopted this journey, and we started from the first group of borderline products that dates back to 2011, where we were represented with one of my managers, who is extremely expert on this. And so we have worked on Rule 5. So what is Rule 5 stating of this 93/42 directive on medical devices. It's quite generic or not specific, but we started from there. So all invasive devices in relation with bodily orifices that are not bounded to be connected with an active medical device and have to be connected to class 1 medical active devices. So this is the invasive nature or the orifice of the body, which are the right references for these devices based on the substances. And then we refer to class 1, the temporary use, and so these are included in 2A if there is a short-term use, if these are not used up to the pharynx, they can be defined as such in the ear channel and the nose channel up to the eardrum, if they belong to class 1. Class B, if there is a longer-term use, unless these are used in an oral cavity up to the pharynx, in the ear cavity up to the eardrum, or in the nose, if these are not absorbed by the mucosal membrane. And so they are included in class 2A. All invasive devices which are not surgical, that are to be connected to an active medical device, included in 2A or higher, are included in class 2. So here you can see in bold the temporary use, short-run use, or long-term use. The only rule that was supported on this device was the time of use. It was the parameter to classify these tools.
Dirvi che sono in collegamento sia il dottor D'Acunto che il dottor Scalzo della Commissione, ci stanno sentendo.
And of course, I want to say hello to also those who are not here, but they are listening to us. They're not present in this room. And then thank you for all of you, even if you're not here physically. I wanted to underline this aspect. So as I was saying, this is an important rule that we have applied so far, number 5. And it is not just for substance-based medical devices, but it has been adapted to that. It is based on the duration of the use. It doesn't give a proper classification in terms of risks, and it doesn't consider toxicity fully. That's why we have started to work on the regulation. It was 2014 when we started. And so we have set the basis, the premises, the old regime to this, applied to these invasive tools. We didn't consider fully the role of the invasive aspects and the risks. The medical-based substances or substances absorbed by the body or dispersed in the body at a local level, it is important to introduce proper rules. And proper rules are very important. This is very interesting when we talk about specific rules. The rules of classification should consider in the part or in the body where the medical device exercise an action, also when it is introduced or applied, and the possible systemic absorption of substances or the products related to metabolism in the body related again to the substances. So number 59 introduces this aspect, but we went on and we worked a lot on these aspects.
Scusatemi. Sulla regola 21.
This is rule number 21. So we have rule number 21. We've created rules. It was born. It's like a baby for us. It's very important. This sector, from the very beginning, we have considered this sector as something that needed to be fully implemented for all the devices that do not find a space, proper space in other regulations. They are not in anywhere. This is the most convincing. They cannot find their space anywhere because of their characteristics, because they cannot demonstrate fully that they are something else. That's why the other rules take for granted that we are talking about medical devices, but then they go into the classification. And now we have doubts about that as a matter of fact, there are substances or medical devices made of substances that act with a mechanism as medical devices and not as drugs. And therefore, so Rules 21, the first proposal of September 2012, in a very timid way, the first proposal, devices are composed of substances or a combination of substances that are intended to be introduced into the human body via a body orifice or applied to the skin, and that they are absorbed by or locally dispersed in the human body are classified as almost drugs. If we look at the analysis of the risks, this is the principle, the main principle. But as I said, in 2014, we have worked on Rule 221, and so we have, as you can see, the devices made of substances or substances which are intended to administer medical products by inhalation. And, the combination of substances that are intended to be introduced into the human body via a body orifice or applied to the skin, and they're absorbed by a locally dispersed in the human body are classified as. And so in class 3, if they are systemically absorbed by the human body in order to achieve the intended purpose. Class 3, if they achieve their intended purpose in the stomach or lower gastrointestinal tract, and they or their products of metabolism are systemically absorbed by the human body. Class 2, if they're applied to the skin or if they're applied in the nasal or oral cavity as far as pharynx and achieve their intended purpose on those cavities. And class 2B in all other cases. Thank you. But the European Commission, member states, following these definitions, felt the need to redefine some concepts. And we're talking about this now. The MEDEV that are currently under debate and the guidelines about the classifications. We are trying to define the medical devices and their classifications, but at the same time, we have a tendency to lead them towards the drug area, because there's a lack of expertise in this topic. Because expertise helps us to understand what it is not a drug and what it is a medical device. We are all aware of that, but we have to defend our position. In Italy, it represents 28% of medical devices. It's an important market in Italy, and it is quite attractive for many stakeholders, the member states, whereas they defend their market characterized by drugs. It is not the first time that the authority tries to defend a product that in other countries was a drug. And honestly, so far, technically and scientifically and also legally, we have defended all our medical devices certified in Italy, for which somebody, just because they have a drug in their country, they tried in any possible way, also judicial ways, also suing or using ministerial approaches to defend their positions against our positions. We have defended fully our products without any fear, without any doubts. Some days ago, someone asked me, yes, there are many medical devices based on substances. Yes, I know. The notified body certify them really, but could you defend them all? And I answered yes, because the notified body has always worked properly, and no medical device has been certified, and it was then a drug, and we are convinced of that, and we're going on following this direction. It's a medical device because the final use destination is fully reached. It is not a pharmacological action just for nothing. It's not a pharmacological action that they pursue. So we defend these medical devices because we know what we do, and we are sure that what we have done so far, it is not that we defended our system, that it is in compliance with the laws and the regulations. So the others that defend their own system, they are also right because they defend their own position. But we can't have a general rule if other countries have products or substances that are in their country as a drug and that they have to defend it. They can do it, but legally talking, we have to write what is sustainable. And if something demonstrating facts is not translated into something sustainable, it means that there is something wrong. So, or at least we don't know fully if that way of making a drug, making a product become a drug, is not yet there. We're not ready for there. So if we create a drug dossier, it's not like creating a medical device dossier. You need a pharmacological means that we're using. If we don't have them, we don't have them. So let's look. Of course, we can talk about local dispersion, because that process is a process through which substances are dispersed in the body. They stay in the site without reaching the systemic circulation. It's true, yes. We have to demonstrate that that activity is exercised fully in that site. We have then the need to define other concepts. Also, again, we're talking about MEDEV, so the functional substance that needs a definition in order to distinguish it from excipients. And manufacturers should demonstrate that a substance is a functional substance in agreement with intended use of the medical device.
Qui dentro non sa.
We all know what we're talking about. In Italy, as with borderlines, we have always worked considering mainly about the intended use of the medical device, the site also, and how we reach the site. In the past, we used to say only if the action mechanism is a mechanic one, that it was easier, like a pacemaker or a heart valve. It was not a drug. But now the discussion, the debate is quite different. It's more articulated. So we have to understand the differences between one and the other. And the practical rules, as far as classifications, it is important to describe also other concepts, products that act in the nasal or oral cavity that may be, to some extent, ingested or inhaled. These products will be Class 2A devices. And if these products achieve their intended purpose solely in these cavities, and this is another important aspect, and not in the respiratory traits in the stomach or in lower gastrointestinal traits. So there are also other general rules. So we're talking about different rules to define the wide range of substances, the medical device based on substances in an exclusive way in the concept of substances. All the substances are part of a medical device, including those that are in compliance with the 2083 rule. We know that there are some devices And we have worked a lot on this aspect in the past. There are some devices that contain an integrating element, a drug, a substance that autonomously is a drug, but is not the main substance. And the rules already mentioned that. How can we distinguish a drug to a device? When we take a syringe with a drug, so the main action by the drug is like heparin. But if we have the same example, we take a catheter with heparin. I know that heparin helps the catheter to work fully to reach its goal. So it's a device to dictate in the end, not the drug. But this is a good example, but at the same time, the main action and the secondary actions have to be clarified by the manufacturers and by those who write the documentation, the dossier. What is the main destination for the product, and what are the other substances used for? Not all the products that have got a drug are drugs, and this is the same principle.
Principalmente la destinazione d'uso.
The destination of use of some substance-based devices cannot be reached or supported by means by immunological, pharmacological, or immunological means, and this is the reason why we are being confronted so far. We are being under debate. The metabolical, immunological, and pharmacological aspects are at stake. So we have to be careful. We cannot make all the, not everything can become a medical device. We have to be careful, but the classification considers the site of application of the medical device and the site in which the medical device has its action, where it exercised it, where it reaches its action. The case-by-case is sometimes necessary, but when it is necessary, when we haven't studied on it properly, or maybe someone tries to do it in the wrong way. There are some drugs around. There are some ways to be in the market. There are some quick ways, if you allow me the word. And we have to pursue these people. We have to sue these people. We have some people transform, they mask a drug into a medical device, but it's not a medical device. So we have to be careful about these people. Do they exercise their action as with a pharmacological element? But these are not serious people. 28% of companies, our many companies, are serious companies. They make a very clear difference between the medical devices and the drugs.
Eccola qua ancora, la regola 21.
Here we have again Rule 21. There are many examples here on these devices and their classification. The first is composed of substances or the association of substances that are aimed at be introduced in the body through orifices or through the skin, and that are absorbed or locally dispersed in the human body, and they are classified. And here you can find the different classifications. Class 3. If their products of the metabolism are systemically absorbed by the human body to reach their final destination, their destination of use, and other classifications, class 3, if they reach their purpose in the stomach or in the low gastrointestinal traits, their products or their metabolism are systematically absorbed by the human body, or they're applied to the skin, or they're to the oral mucoses or nasal spaces through the pharynx, and they reach their purpose in these cavities and in all other cases. The examples are a bit complex. In the first part, as you can see a question mark. We're talking about drugs, but in the classification in the stomach. We have different examples, tangible examples. They are on the market. They are very good products. They're oral antacids, alginates, and so on. Calcium carbonate, glucomannan, hydrogels. Actions is mechanical because there is no saliva, and we physically create the action. They create the right amount of saliva in the mouth, in the dry throat. And ketosan and other similar substances that are important substances that have an action typical of a medical device. The cellulose balls for obese people, and they were considered as strange, weird devices. We were frightened about this new thing that was in the 1990s. We were faced with something completely new. Those examples faced us with a new challenge. Another classification, the substance-based formulations for skin treatment, for many skin treatments. And here we talk about parts that with drugs or managed with drugs, and then products, salt water use, for example, as nose or throat sprays. So it's a physical action. It's an action to moisturize the interested site, the interested part. And then oral cough suppressants achieving their intended purpose in the oral cavity as far as the pharynx. Then we have other cases, for example, simethicone preparations. When we touch it, we know it's a mechanical action again. And gel for vaginal moisturization, or on the different unguents and vaginal lubricants and so on. So when I read, I see the action, the typical action of a medical device.
So substance-based medical devices go quite quickly. Of course, you can read Rule 21 by yourself. So what I wanted to tell you is that the Commission that is listening to us after the application of a member state or on its own initiative, after consulting the Medical Device Coordination Group, establishes through execution acts. So it can execute if and decide whether a product can enter the category as a device. It guarantees to the member states that have to share specialized insights and knowledge to determine the appropriate regulatory status in deciding a possible regulation state as a device involving biofilms or cells, biocides, or cosmetic products. The Commission guarantees an adequate level of consultation case by case with the European Agency for Drugs, EMA, ECA for chemical substances, and the European Authority for Food Safety. So with all authorities, we work on the borderline cases. So, on Annex 8, this states that member countries have to decide case by case. So in deciding about the borderline products which regard all the substances, they can turn to the European authorities regulating the borderline situations. As for Article 4, normative status of products, again, it is stated what's the procedure to involve the member states and what the Commission can do on its own initiative upon consultation of the Medical Device Coordination Group. And again, Article 4 confirms the need of an adequate level of consultation with regulatory agencies in charge. And Here is the definition, the most debated, of pharmacological means. So the current definition and the proposed version, with some examples on cellular constituents, cellular membranes, intracellular structures, DNA, proteins, enzymes, RNA, extracellular matrix, blood and its components, body fluids. That's not an easy task at all, but we have to work on this with the right and competent authorities to understand which are the pharmacological means. So the examples of action via pharmacological means, the interaction between a ligand, agonist, antagonist, and the receptor, or the interaction between a substance and the lipid membrane. Of course, the current version is not precisely this. In the meantime, in Europe, some competent authorities are all questioning on what to do when there is a specific case to be analyzed. And last but not least, the VAT rate. We talk about MDMS in terms also of taxes. The VAT rate, according to Article 1, Paragraph 3 of the Budget Law 2019, omissions are those subject to VAT 10%, which includes also the MDMS. So they are recognized. They are recognized also for VAT, so that are normally used for medical treatment and the prevention of diseases and treatment. So these medical devices are extremely important. Also, being recognized for tax payments. If they are recognized for VAT tax rates, it means that these are all well certified, and the ministry knows that this MDMS stand for a great opportunity of growth, both in terms of health and innovation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 700 companies and 28% of market share. We will not talk about VAT. It means that they exist, they are there. So the European framework shall grasp and develop these opportunities, because it's an opportunity also for other countries which probably did not understand that. The new European regulation paves the way to the therapeutical use of substances which have a non-pharmacological mechanism of action. And again, I could insist on this, providing evidence, full evidence of those products that are actually devices that couldn't be drugs. So in compliance with all the regulations, this sector is to be further developed in the future. A grapefruit is a lemon that had an opportunity and exploited this opportunity. As Oscar Wilde says, we really hope that we will cast more and more attention on this. Thanks to the wonderful city of Florence that allowed us to host this event. And finally, we hope that the High Institute for Health can be a hub of reference in this regard for certification of these medical devices made of substances. It is going to achieve in a short time the European certification. It's one of the few institutes that can provide this certification. We really hope that it's going to expand, because we really believe in this. Thank you. Thanks to Mrs. Marletta, who, besides from performing its activity at the ministry, is really passionate on this topic. And so the results that she has achieved are also to be credited to all her effort. Thanks again. We have in connection Mr. Salvatore D'Acunto, as head of the unity on the medical devices of the European Commission, and Mr. Salvatore Scalzo, legal assistant of the unit of the European Commission for Medical Devices. We can see them in the monitor. We greet them. Hi, Salvatore. Good morning. You have the floor. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. A warm greeting to you, dear Mino, and thanks for this invitation. I will not go into the depth of such a detailed topic that was presented in a very exhaustive way, comprehensive way by Mrs. Marletta. Salvatore today it's Black Friday. You have two speakers at the price of one here in Brussels. He will dedicate himself to provide some insights on our work on Rule 21. Instead, first for myself, I would like to give you a brief overview of the state of progress in the implementation of the two regulations on medical devices in such a delicate phase. As you might know, we are transitioning from the current Commission to the new one that's going to come into force on the 1st of December, presumably, if it's going to be confirmed. And in our team, we are transitioning inside, because I'm head of the unit of the two sectors for medical and cosmetic devices, and the part for medical devices, as you might know, is going to be no longer part of the portfolio of competence of the Commissioner for Industrial Politics and the Single Market, but will be fully integrated in the portfolio of the Commissioner in charge of health politics. So this is the administrative transition as from the 1st of January. So we are in a particularly active phase from the administrative point of view, but our commitment to go on in this direction is very high. Frankly speaking, it's quite a demanding time to enforce a new regulation that is being fully debated at the Council for Health on the 9th of December, so in just a few days. There's going to be a presentation by the Commission and the new Commissioner, presumably, on the state of progress with reference to the new data bank, on which I will talk later on, whose opening is going to be postponed by a couple of years. So I would like to introduce to you the state of the art, starting by reminding a basic topic, my PowerPoint presentation, that we are talking clearly about a juridical change. Maybe it's trivial to remind that, but it's important at the same time. We are transitioning from the use of 3 directives to the enforcement of 2 regulations. From the juridical viewpoint, this means that we no longer have rules that have to be adopted on the national level with all the inconveniences that this entails in terms of different interpretations or different applications, but the 2 standardized texts that have to be applied directly in all member countries. As you know, in the next slide, you can visibly see the transitional period is of 3 years up to May 2020. As for the regulation on medical devices, and until May 2022 for the IVD. Next slide. You can verify how clearly this date we are working on this with sort of boogeyman. We are working with other stakeholders. It's an important date that signs the general application, but other provisions were entered into force, like all the governance or the rules for the codes of notified bodies that have already been implemented for more than 2 years now. There are other rules instead that are going to become applicable gradually after 2020. So this regards, for example, the registration of devices, the positioning of the single identifier, and most of all, the validity period of certificates that are issued according to directives in force up to May 2024. So this is a very important transition in time to avoid to have a big bang on May next year. And this provision allows the use of certificates issued under this directive up to a maximum of May 24. And this law was envisaged by the European lawmaker to allow this transition in a smooth way and gradually. The final rule that's going to be applied in 2027 regards the coordinated procedures for clinical investigations. The governance has changed as well as for medical devices. In the two subsequent slides, you can see how we have a structure that is based, is centered, of course, on the European Commission as this is the driver of all the activities. Here we have marked three main directorates: the Joint Research Center, DG GROW, DG JRC, but of course, and Santé, the DG GROW has to be eliminated from this presentation as from the 1st of January. In the next slide, you can see how this governance is highly structured. The board, the main board is the medical device coordination group. That's the heart of all the activities that shall guarantee uniformity and application and interpretation by providing guidelines, as they are already doing. To do that, it resorts to a whole set of 13 working groups that have been established during the last 2 months. Now everything has been finalized, and so it has to comply with rules of transparency, the choice according to objective criteria, and these working groups concern different fields and notified bodies, technical norm, rules, market surveillance, and international aspects. You can find borderline cases, and you can find all this on the slides. I'm not going to list it. Clustered, and it's a process that it's a bottom-up that culminates in the medical device coordination group. So besides from this entity that is envisaged by the regulation, it's also a more informal body that's made up of the member states I was referring to in the previous slide, who summon informally to support our activity. That is the CMG, Competent Authority, Medical Device Group Forum, which reflects the concerns in the everyday routines of the admin life of the member countries. So this forum is a spokes hub of certain concerns that are then transposed to the MDCG. So besides from the formal structure that I'm depicting in my slides, there's also an informal structure that is supporting it. So the two structures are working hand in hand. The MDCG is separate from the committee that has to formally vote on the implementation acts and executional acts that have to be adopted by the Commission with the majority support by the member countries, of course. So the final slides that I have prepared regard the state of play, the state of the art of what we have achieved up to date in the implementation of the regulations, and also what we have just prepared and is going to be finalized in the next few months, in most of the cases before May 2020 and also afterwards. Of course, May 2020 counts for the end of this process. So I would like to draw your attention on some horizontal themes. I've just referred to the new governance. There's also an activity of communication, because we also cooperate with stakeholders and national authorities. The Medical Device Coordination Group is chaired by the Commission, but it comprises representatives of member countries. We gather 5 or 6 times a year. I would say rather 6 times due to the urgent themes we have to tackle. The last one was last week on the new data bank. Next meeting will be on the 13th December. So you can see the frequency of the meetings dictated by the urgencies and priorities of themes to analyze. We have a rolling plan that we constantly update on our website, which summarizes all the main activities on the normative and non-normative side. And there's also a second part of documentation that regards documents approved by the medical device coordination groups and documents that are being drafted. We have already adopted 30 documents on themes ranging from notified bodies to UDIs, EUDAMED, market surveillance, and so on. And there are other 50 that are being prepared. So this is going a bit, the size is giving you the size of the working group works underway. So the new system is the notified bodies, which is highly debated as a topic that is raising concerns. We are witnessing a transitional phase. Not all these roughly 58 notified bodies who are designated according to the current directives. Not all these 58, we already know, will be renewed and can be designated also according to the regulations. So there will be this disruptive change that might give the impression of a system that can be exposed to systemic risks that cannot work. But of course, the new regulations have been conceived and adopted to be more selective, so that those who pass the tests, those who are capable of being designated, will be recognized and have certain capabilities and competencies and qualifications that are public health proof. So we expect a lower number, more selected, more qualified, considering also that, moreover, the new notified bodies that have already been designated are 9. They will become soon 12 by the end of the year. We expect to have about 20 in the first 3 months of 2020. But this new notified body have new skills, new competences, new qualifications, and a new staff. It has been estimated that as for the regulation of medical devices, many bodies have 50% staff more, and for IVD, it even doubled the capacity of staff, because on IVD there will be a greater, massive need to have these devices being certified by the notified bodies. So the situation has to be carefully monitored, and of course, it's first of all a matter of assessing the preparation by bodies that are mostly private entities, commercial entities, and they have to be capable on their initiatives to be empowered with all the tools to pass the tests. Partially, it also depends on the procedures as far as we are concerned, as we also have to issue certain recommendations by the medical device coordination group. We try, of course, to streamline the procedures, and instead of having 40 days to submit and adopt a recommendation, in certain cases we acted on 2 or 3 days, just to give you an idea on how we try at best as possible to accelerate our timing. So these are the quantitative forecasts. This being said, with the 12 notified bodies that we will have by the end of this year, according to a calculation that is only approximate, we shall cover half of the existing certificates according to the directive. So but quite an important share of the market. And then, of course, before May 2020 and after, we will continue with these initiatives, which are not over with the date of the implementation. An important part of the new system is made up of scientific entities. The new regulation, as you know, was subject to many disputes on the models, so we had to comply with the notified body, and we kept this methodology. But it had to be strengthened through the role and intervention of an expert panel, so scientific experts who shall support the action performed by the notified bodies. And the work The activity of these scientific entities is very well developed. We already had the first executional deed. We have published an invitation to manifest interest, about 700 applications of experts being part of these panels and a compliance list. So we are starting the recruitment phase in the light of the new appointment of members of this roughly 12 panels that will be set up at the beginning of the next year in the different fields of interest for medical devices. So orthopedics, cardiology, and depending on the needs. In the next slide, that's the second part of what we said up to now, what we have achieved up to now. Evdamed, it's a thorny issue, and I will tell you later on. As for the UDIs, the single identifier of devices, the work is very well developed. We had a formal deed to identify the 4 entities which shall issue these identifiers. The work is going on for the ABD. As I said, we have a bit of more time, but the ABD system will undergo more radical transformation compared to that regarding medical devices and many other topics. We already had a scientific opinion by the committee, and you can see the different topics that were already analyzed in the guidelines, about 30 guidelines that were adopted by the Medical Device Coordination Group. We have an information campaign so that not only medium or big-sized companies, but also small-sized companies can be engaged. Up to some time ago, we noticed that the level of knowledge of the next deadlines could be improved. So we have decided to increase the level of knowledge and awareness by all the operators. So by raising awareness, disseminating information through the Schaffer Agency of Luxembourg and a third-party consultant, we are performing this communication activity to provide information. We are also working with EMA for the interpretation of the combination products, and we have already started with the first initiative, and that's the final slide to tell you which are next steps. The corrigendum, item 9 here. This could be the next development, and we hope that this corrigendum was going to be the new milestone by next week or December, which is quite in line with the topic that we are dealing with today, the MDMS, because the second corrigendum, among the different technical adjustments that we made, there is one main adjustment that regards the possibility for class 1 devices that will be promoted to a higher class level. This regards exactly the MDMS, or also devices which are still being in class 1 but requiring the intervention of notified body, which is mainly devices used in hospitals, in surgical procedures. These are hundreds of thousands of categories of devices. It's an important, a huge size of the market. For these devices, currently, no transitional period is envisaged. Instead, other higher class devices, as I said, can benefit from the certification up to May 2024. So the possibility to use this transitional period up to May 2024 is not applicable to the class 1 devices. So inserting in the text this corrigendum that's going to introduce the possibility also for these class 1 devices, either being assessed by the notified body or which shall comply with the higher class levels, we will streamline the burden of effort by the notified bodies and also the duties of the operators who can benefit with the declaration of conformity from the validity of the directive up to May 2024. So it's a matter that has a systemic importance that is currently screened by the Council and the Parliament, so it has to be approved unanimously by the Council with a majority of votes at the Parliament. Currently, we have positive and promising signals on both sides, so the role of the Commission from the formal viewpoint is not existing because it's a corrigendum, so it's a technical fine-tuning of the text. But of course, as for the topic, we are really careful and we are watching the situation strictly, closely to streamline the procedure of this process. And by the end of the year, so the week of the 16th of 17th of December, to get to final approval by the Council upon approval by the Council to have in this week the implementation by the European Parliament, 16th and 17th of December. We are quite confident that this can happen. So these are the immediate deadlines and schedule, so other topics on which we are working, notified bodies, the technical rules, Annex 16 that regards non-medical products like aesthetical products. For the first time, they're going to be part of the application scope of the regulation, the reprocessing, and I'm not to mention all the other topics for UDIs, expert panels, laboratories, and other important topics. Before leaving the floor to Salvatore, I wanted to draw your attention on Eudamed, which is a thorny issue, as I said. So I want to talk about this because in this year we had worked on the possibility to have a gradual opening of Eudamed, so to provide operators and authorities with different progressive modules, one after the other, starting with the module regarding the registration of operators. That's the basic module that should issue a number of single identifiers at the European level for operators. So after many juridical considerations, we have reached an internal conclusion in the Commission involving also other services. That's not possible to have a progressive, gradual opening of this data bank, but that it can be done only once all the whole data bank is available. So there will be an audit that can be performed only once all the modules of this data bank will be ready, and this can occur not before May 2022. So on the date of the implementation of the second regulation. So right now, it cannot be used juridically, Eudamed, but this doesn't mean that from the practical point of view, certain parts, advanced parts of Eudamed that will be ready on May 2020 are already available for the operators in the next months to come. So we are debating on this. We have summoned an ad hoc meeting for next week to discuss on a B plan regarding Eudamed, which is already envisaged in general by the lawmaker, not in the details, because if for our regulation, the implementation May 2020 implies the activation of the regulation with or without data bank. So the juridical approval of the regulation does not depend on the availability of the data bank, unlike the regulation on clinical tests, for which the data bank is a prerequisite for the functioning of the regulation itself. In our case, the lawmaker itself envisaged that the regulation can and shall function even without the data bank. So It's a matter of assessing how to streamline the exchanges among member countries to involve operators in the lack of a data bank. So we are assessing what might be some alternative mechanisms, volunteering mechanisms accepted by everyone, so that what from the IT point of view is already available in the next months can already function, and then later formalized on May 2022. So this being said, I would like to stop here and leave the floor to the next speaker, quite briefly, because of course it is a work in progress. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I would like to give you a short contribution about specific issue that of substance-based medical devices. I will be very short and to the point. I will look at the procedures as for the aspects, as mentioned by Salvatore, that we're still working on and debating on some aspects. So the level of information is limited so far because the member states are debating on that, as said, with all stakeholders involved. Indeed, we need to clarify some laws related to the issue. If we can go back to the last slide. First of all, from the point of view of governments, well, who's working on that? The last parts of this, the last points of this slide, the guidelines based on substance-based medical devices, is a group, is a borderline and classification group, is a subgroup of the medical device coordination group, as it has been presented by Dr. D'Acunto beforehand. And it's a group, includes also stakeholders, and this is a very important in terms of classifications and clarification. All this has a great effect, a great impact on the persons involved. This is a group that wanted to include strongly the all the stakeholders, the persons involved, the persons interested could take part of the activities of the group. They are members, they are observers, but they are permanent observers. In terms of guidelines, where are we so far? There are three actions, three works, so to say, so far, presented also by Professor Marletta in our previous speech. We have a guideline on classification rules that is at stake at the moment, including also Rule 21, and an updating of the MEDEV guidelines that regards the borderline with pharmaceutical issues. I can say that, as it has already been said by someone else a time ago, we're trying to respect the deadline, which is by the end of the year, and to submit the draft to all the interested, all the parts involved that will express their opinion in this sense. An important point that I would like to put out your attention, to draw your attention to, regarding Rule 21 is the differentiation that has already been mentioned by Mrs. Marletta. The functional elements and the recipients. This is at stake in terms of classification, where we have the need to clarify this aspect, the difference between substances that contribute in a strong way to the implementation of the medical role of the product and the excipients that do not play this vital role, but they have other goals, other aims to improve the taste of the product or to change the color of the product. In the discussion with member states, it is important to find agreement and to clarify in a very important way and to distinguish these two substances. And this is very important also to reach a classification, a more appropriate classification of the product itself. The third document that we are working on at the moment, it is at a higher stage, at a higher level now. We have been working on that for a long time. It is about pharmacological, metabolical, and immunological aspects. The stakeholders have been consulted so far. We have shared views with the different operators and researchers, and they are working now. They are looking at the remarks and comments that the stakeholders made so far, and we hope to reach very soon a final draft that will take in good consideration the remarks by the stakeholders. These are the three main documents that we are working on, and we are very positive, and we think we're going to have a very, we will find our achievements, reach our achievements very soon. Also, as far as the legal recognition of the products, this is another important issue, and it is something related to facts. The substance-based medical devices is also part of a discussion, of many discussions before 2012. Today we have a legal recognition in the regulation. If we think about rules in the Annex 1 or annex related to conformity and compliance. So I think that legislators recognize that there are actually products that have medical goals and they do not act in a pharmacological way. And in respect to these, the legal framework of the medical devices represent the reference framework. So the idea is that should be our spirit, our mood, so to say, to give shape and give a value, a real value to the judicial and legal writings, and to be as far as possible, to be as clear as possible eventually. And we are working together with the Commission and the European states, the European members, to achieve our final goals and deadlines. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Dr. Scalzo.
Thank you, Dr. Scalzo. Thank you, Dr. Mr. D'Acunto. Your interventions are very clear, and of course we have fully shared, or at least I understood important things such as we have still a long way ahead. We have still to work, especially as far as guidelines are concerned that have been mentioned by Mr. Scalzo. I think that this will be the chance for us, the opportunity to be as clear as possible and to fill in the gaps. On the other hand, we might have some doubts still in terms of manufacturers. We still have some doubts. The notified bodies there are not many notified bodies. We have all agreed on the fact that we needed more strict rules of the notified bodies, because when a notified body works improperly, so in the wrong way, and approves products that are not in compliance with the regulation or were not in compliance with the directive, this generates several negative side effects in the entire system. So we need rules to be respected, and we need the certified body, the notified certified bodies need to be able to be as strict as possible, because the notified bodies are faced with many assessment procedures, and so we really hope that the rules need to be there. We need to have enough rules. They have to be strict ones in order to guarantee protection and safeguard to patients. They have to be clear, and they have to be appropriate rules according to the sector they belong to, and they have to be considered starting from the same from the same point. They should have a same starting point. So we are a bit worried about the role played by the notified bodies. That this might be a problem. And also the deadline of this transition period. We have already talked about that. It's nothing new. But today is, again, the possibility that we have to say that the transparency of the transition period is another aspect that is part of the debate. Also, in relation to the notified bodies, and we need to be more clear in that sense as well. We do hope that the industrial sector will understand that we are in favor of these regulations, but give us the possibility to work properly and also allow manufacturers and serious manufacturers and serious companies give them the possibility to work, because where companies or manufacturers that are that want to use narrow ways and that want to work improperly might spoil and unbalance those who want to work very seriously. As far as medical devices is concerned. And in Italy, we are playing a vital role in this area, so thank you very much for your contribution.
Direi che a questo punto, se naturalmente
I'm talking to Mr. D'Acunto, Mr. Scalzo. If you want to stay with us, if you want to be connected, unless you have further engagements. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
siamo all'ultimo
So our last morning speech, then we will have the question time. We have talked about notified bodies, and so we have Ms. Marco Aldi of the highest National Health Institute.
Grazie. Allora, si parlava di preoccupazione per gli organismi notificati.
We were talking about fears and concerns about the notified bodies' role. We are worried as well in terms of respecting the deadlines of new designations, but also being able to satisfy manufacturers' needs. As we were saying yesterday, notified bodies can satisfy certain certification requests, but there's a limit in terms of resources, of course. I would like to focus on some aspects related to substance-based medical devices that is going to have a great impact in terms of therapeutical effects, in terms of citizens and entire market and the system. We should not focus on Rule 21 only, because there are many points in MDM. I think Rule 21 was a great revolution, but that's not all. I would like to focus on something else as well. I belong to a notified body. So what's happening now in our world is something very important. So the relation between manufacturers and notified body is very important. It's very important to have a dialogue with companies, with manufacturing companies. We have to find a common goal, shared action plan, shared responsibilities, a clear classification also of their responsibilities and roles. So new procedures of consultation. And we are not just talking about the relationship between manufacturers and notified bodies. We're talking also about consultations that will have to take place as far as some medical devices made of substances. Important clinical studies. I think this one of the main problems and some conclusive remarks. The regulation, as we said, has created the need of going in depth studies and clarifications. It defined, furthermore, the responsibilities of the different stakeholders. Competent authorities are going to play a vital role in coordinating the different activities, in controlling the bodies, in monitoring the different people involved. Manufacturers, they will have to make a further effort. And we want to reward those who are operating in full swing and they do their job properly. We're talking about products that are absolutely necessary and they are therapeutical measures. So notified bodies, yes, of course, when we were talking before, Mr. Scalzo and Acunto were talking about the expectations of the reduction of the number of notified bodies is a big concern because of the ability to satisfy the market demand, the market needs. And this is the system that has been changing so far thanks to the regulation, in order to create a system that can manage somehow, in a qualitative way, the medical devices sector. As notified bodies, we are at the forefront, and we have been doing that for a while now. In these last 2 or 3 years, we have been faced with different professional associations, Supermed, for example, in Milan. In June, we'll have another meeting with the different notified bodies. And we had, and we're going to have other important gatherings of the kind. So notified bodies, we know that we had to submit our application for the regulation of medical devices. I'm not going to specify anything about the in vitro diagnosis. This is another aspect, and it's a big revolution in that field as well. We had to submit the applications, and this was a great job for us. We were faced with a big challenge. Many resources were used, a great number of staff, the ability to respond to the new requirements of the regulation. And we had to reorganize everything, also in terms of structures of the notified body, and that was not easy at all. The designation or the allocation procedure, it's a very complex one. Whereas in the past, it was in the hands of the competent authorities. Now we have the Commission, we have the Medical Device Coordination Group, as was mentioned before, with recommendations for the allocation. There's a joint assessment group, members of Commission, members of competent authorities that are not belonging to the country where the notified body has its seat, its local office, head office. So which were for us the critical elements. How could we face the critical elements? So first of all, long deadlines and the delays in terms of the directive. The directive is still existing, and we're still operating with surveillance actions and projects and so on and so far. And we have all these other obligations to meet. It has been not easy for us, and also for the competent authority it was not easy because they have to deal with the designation to the allocations of 11 notified bodies. This is our allocation or designation process.
Noi abbiamo applicato ad agosto 2018, l'autorità responsabile.
So we have different steps. So we have the submission of the application, then we have the completeness checkup by the responsible authority, then we have the assessment of the submitted documentation, and then we have the joint audit, and then we have the at the moment we have the undergoing evaluation.
I nostri grossi problemi chiaramente.
Which was one of the biggest problems for us? It was to look at the prescriptions for the assessing staff, assessing stakeholders of the notified bodies. So we had to give
Qualifica del personale della
evidence of the skills and competence of the people involved of an area that it is evolving, still evolving. So the medical device that are based on substances. So we put a great effort to define several qualification criteria and the definition of the different staff and their roles, and to work also on the training or refreshment training in this issue, in this field. We had to offer also continuous training to the staff involved. So we had to put a great effort on that in order to show that we were ready for the job in terms of adjusting to the regulation. It's about 2 years that we are debating we have been debating with the manufacturing companies in order to find solutions related to the qualification of products. And this is the first step. And then rules of classification, new rules, the new evaluation or assessment approach, because this one is completely different compared to the directive and the clinical aspects. As far as qualification is concerned, we're talking about Rule 21, but we should not forget that when we talk about MDMS, the basic problem is the problem of qualification. If a medical device can be considered as such on the basis of definitions that are directive definitions or regulation definitions. This is the first step. When a manufacturer has the responsibility pursuant to European Union rules, this is the first step that the manufacturer should be faced with. He should understand if the product that is offering it can be a medical device, and this should happen at the very first stage, at the designing stage. Whether it is a directive issue or a regulation issue, this is just a stage of the process that we have to consider in every sense of the world. All the stakeholders have to consider that, because it is our main duty to define it. So before talking about classification, before talking about rules, this is the first point. When we talk about substances, this is the main obstacle to be faced with. And of course, we go back to the mechanism of action, and we know that in the past, we had to manage situations which were borderline situations, because we have different situations, different definitions, drug, medical device that sometimes are overlapping, and we have to understand through the proper tools to show that one has got mechanical characteristic typical of a medical device and not of a drug. And this is very important, whether it is a directive or whether it is a regulation. There are products, and somebody mentioned this problem in the morning today. There are products that might have the same purpose, but they might act in with different mechanisms. So there are different products with different rules and laws that can be applied in a fully different ways. And so we will have to follow this new regulation.
Erano proprio quelli che citava, credo, la dottoressa anche.
So Mrs. Marletta was mentioning precisely this. This morning we talked about research activities in which we are involved as notified body in the past, precisely to define certain important distinction between medical devices, drugs, and to define, and I see Mrs. Capone here, she was one of the colleagues with whom we have worked a lot to define these scopes, different scopes, and trying to understand if we are moving in the right direction by classifying a product as a medical device. So to date, we were all told to us notified bodies during the joint audit that we had for the MDR designation that we do no longer have to consider the MEDEV because these are documents, just guidelines, which refer to the directives. But actually, we can work on this right now because, as it has been said, we do not have the updated guidelines for the requirements of the regulations yet. We do not have the common specifications or harmonized rules. So a little bit we have to refer to the state of the art because we as notified bodies can already certify. So what we know of the mechanisms of action as a definition, we know that according to this very well-known guideline, and we know equally well for experience how the assessments, as Mrs. Maleta said, are quite often case by case. This is worrying us enormously. I agree with Fernanda and with Mrs. Maleta, of course. We are really concerned because if the definition of the mechanism of action of pharmacological nature will move in this direction, we will have big problems because everything, if we are lucky, is included in class 3, rule 14. Otherwise, it's a drug. So I hope that this can be solved in a more suitable way according to the kind of products we are talking about, because otherwise the therapeutical solutions that we have said, in which we believe, and we have believed over all these years, as it was demonstrated its efficiency, we will lose this in terms of efficacy, and we do not opt for that. Rule 21, the slide that Mrs. Marletta has introduced, starting from where we moved from Rule 21. These are some of the classification rules that were modified by the regulation. I would like to particularly focus on Rule 14 for medical devices containing as an integral part a drug, because here there is an important change, and of course on Rule 21. On Rule 14,
Da parte dei fabbricanti.
The manufacturers are thinking about all these implications because Rule 14, compared to 13, 9342, has a modified definition, and the effect of the substance on the human body disappears. It just talks about the ancillary action. So it's moving from the importance of the action on the human body to the presence of the substance in the medical device. To us, and it has been debated also in one of the joint audits that we had by the Commission for the designations according to 920, the previous regulation for notified bodies, this was a point of discussion because here the intent of the lawmaker is precisely to say if there is a pharmacologically active principle, if the manufacturer thought it was necessary to insert that pharmacologically active principle in the product, Rule 14, Class 3, with all the consequences of assessment and consultation procedures that are implied. And so this is, again, a reassessment review of currently certified products, because many are going to change their classifications. And so we can do everything, meaning that procedures with competent authorities are being carried out, but it's important not only the Rule 21, but also the other aspects. Rule 21, we have already seen this. We can move on. Here is the great revolution. First of all, Class 1 is disappearing from the MDMS, and a corrigendum is being approved, envisaging the extension of the period of Class 1 medical devices up to 2024. We will see if this period will be approved. And anyway, it's important that manufacturers, regardless of this, work at present to review the products and to reclassify the products to see how they're going to be classified and treated and assessed in terms of the requirements of the new regulation. There will be a certain increase in medical devices, so it will be necessary to ask the interventions of a notified body, and this goes back to the previous problem, how many notified bodies will be created and qualified to manage these products, because, of course, it's not to be given for granted. In fact, this proposal, I wanted to introduce this slide because it reconnects with what, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Scaldo said on the regulation 185/2017 that published the famous codes of products according to which notified bodies can submit the application for the designation. So here you can see there is precisely one of the codes, MDN 1213, that regards MDMS. So notified bodies that will be designated for this code can intervene. This code, of course, implies a whole set of other competencies with different codes. That's why there was a huge effort by the bodies to qualify the staff. This is, again, an important change in the assessment approach for MDMS, and we can find it in Annex First, requirements of performance and safety. This states that a substance-based medical device absorbed or locally dispersed has to be assessed in terms of quality and safety of its components in relation with Annex 1 of 2001/83. So we have to wait the outcome of the discussion of functional substances or excipients to understand whether manufacturers shall perform studies on the functional substance or substances, or other studies shall be performed as a whole, because this is raising certain problems. Let us not forget that if an ADME study is done on a drug with an active principle, and so we studied the active principle, in the DM based on substances, we can also have 10 or 15 compounds. So you can easily understand that also from the technical viewpoint, proof lab that has to perform an absorption study, it's quite complex. That's why we, as notified body, are getting in touch with different labs, test labs, to understand whether from the technical viewpoint how we can apply the requirements of Annex 1 of the Directive 2001/83 to an MDMS to define this as regulation requests. So there are some perplexities. This is what the regulation requires in terms of documental evidence, is everything that the manufacturer has to prepare from the preclinical point of view in the technical documentation. Classification rules, what is changing for Rule 21? We talk about procedures. If you remember, the first paragraph of Rule 21 talked about the third-class medical devices containing functional substances that are absorbed and contribute to the intended purpose of the product. In this case, there would be another procedure, besides from the intervention of the notified body, through a competent authority for the drug that is not going to assess the pharmacologically active principles in this case, but will assess the quality and safety of substances. And together with the IFA, Drug Competent Authority, we are trying to understand and to see how to rule this intervention and how to activate consultation procedures, which require, as you can see, times that have to be added to the assessment time of the notified body. For medical devices based on substances, the study of products qualification is extremely important. Preclinical trials demonstrating the mechanism of action and enacting some studies to to be compliant with the safety and quality requirements. The consultation procedures, here you can see, wanted to introduce Rule 14, which is not changing in the case of a medical device with a drug as an integral part. Instead, Rule 21, yes, it's changing because there is a consultation procedure with the authorities in charge of drugs or EMA. There's another important procedure to assess the clinical evaluation by the manufacturer with the consultation of the commission of a group of experts. This is a brand new provision for implantable class third. We said yesterday in the other session the definition of implantable changes. An implantable device can be considered also an MDMS, so we started to think also in terms of this possibility. And that's the procedure. So again, we have to sum this path to the procedure in the notified body. So times are longer, and for some, we cannot make some predictions. We are in difficulties because manufacturers constantly ask us for the times, us for certifications. To date, we cannot provide a precise forecast in these terms, both for the burden and the workload and these consultation procedures, that if we don't test these procedures, we cannot provide information on this. The requirements for clinical evaluation, the last item. So, of course, that's another excellent thing that the regulation did, to go more into depth and better clarify all the aspects related to clinical data evaluation, to strengthen all the activities and clinical follow-up activities that the manufacturer has to perform to confirm constantly the safety first, and secondly, the efficacy of products. We, as notified bodies, we had to equip ourselves in terms of resources, so having qualified, experienced clinical staff with suitable qualification. The approach of the regulation in terms of clinical evaluation is not changing. Also, in the case of the regulation, we still maintain the possibility to use clinical data of the literature, but there is a but. We talk about equivalence. And when we talk about MDMS, to testify the quality of these products is, I won't say impossible, but extremely difficult, because these are the three principles of equivalence that have to be satisfied completely to be able to state that a product is equal to another product. And so, as we said yesterday, another problem, two manufacturers could share clinical data of two equivalent medical devices. And will it be feasible? Can it be done? If it's not possible, if it's not feasible, the only solution will be of making clinical investigations with a whole set of problems, of times, ethical committees, costs. And so here again, it's quite complex, but this is something on which, unfortunately, we have to ponder, to reason on, because equivalence has been defined in the regulation. It's a prerequisite, and so it has to be, for MDMS, it has to be considered. How to get prepared? Just a few notes. Manufacturers have to reevaluate products. So understanding if the same classification rules are maintained, the same procedures, if there is a need of reclassification. The analysis and exam of present clinical data, also coming from the literature, of course, class 1. Let us see what kind of clinical data are available, because these products that have to be mainly reclassified will be reassessed by the notified bodies. The competence of the staff for clinical issues. We, as notified bodies, are asked to have highly qualified clinical staff, and this is required also to manufacturers in the preparation of a clinical report, a CR. The clinical qualification has to be high, otherwise these data are not validated. And then, of course, documents and guidelines, everything that is going to be published at the European level in a short time, we hope, is very important. So manufacturers, of course, and also for us as bodies, it's very difficult. We are discussing all the new requirements in the organizations, in the internal organizations. We have to get prepared. With manufacturers, we have talked a lot on an everyday basis. Technical working groups, Italian and European working groups with notified bodies, authorities involved, IFA, as I said, and also in the awareness and the panic, I would say, that probably tomorrow we will be called to make assessments of compliance for certifications in the lack of certain rules, because regulation text, of course, we have all read this, but it's not enough. And so we have to be very proactive altogether. Thank you.
Grazie, dottoressa Marco Aldi. E solo un commento rispetto proprio a...
Thank you. Just a remark as for what you said up to now. Bear in mind that we, as category association, we are noticing that there are many companies, not just a few, that are, of course, assessing the opportunities, and for certain products and product classes, they are deciding to abandon these products because the cost of the new marking is so high and uncertain that they are not willing to invest. And so if a product is abandoned because it doesn't work very well and it's not efficient, we will be very happy, because this would mean that the regulation has hit its targets or one of its goals. But unfortunately, it's not like this, because the products that are abandoned are not this, but products that are not compliant will keep on probably be authorized. And some rules and strict rules are not in line with the very spirit and mission with which the directives originated. So again, those who work in a non-suitable way will receive certain benefits. So technological innovations, opportunities, further opportunities of treatment and prevention, diagnosis and rehabilitation. It's an asset. So once again, we shall try and let European lawmaker and the member states understand that in Italy, not having experiences, it's easier to get certain makeshift solutions, or they just think that producing rules and paper load is just the only solution. But the transposition of all this into the practical situation is very difficult. So we have concluded perfectly on time. So, as I said, we will start the Q&A session. I would like to ask Mrs. Marletta to join us at the panel, because many questions could be to her. And so, let us open the Q&A session. We would like to make the first question. Of course, you might have many doubts.
Io qui non vedo, ahimè, quindi... Tutti. No, adesso l'ho detto e ripetuto di fare domande, ora mi mettete in difficoltà. C'è qualcuno laggiù? Là in fondo, l'ho vista.
Eccomi. La mia domanda è un po'...
My question is a kind of provocation. I go back to what Ms. Marletta said in her speech. We didn't have an example as for the first trade of the Rule 21. They took away this example. It was a cranberry because it had to be absorbed and be adherent and then be eliminated, removed.
Che a mio avviso la cosa più pericolosa del
I think that one of the most dangerous thing of the rule of the regulation is not the classification to 1B class third, but considering that rule that says that if the member states decide that a substance is not a medical disposal in a silent way, it will not be a medical device.
caso del cranberry.
And this is the case of cranberry.
Non abbiamo saputo difendere perché
And we couldn't defend it. And also, the European Medical Agency did not express itself in favor of a very clear pharmacological action. So I was wondering, how can we, within common specifications framework, how can we the motion by a certain regulatory authority should be derived not from the bureaucracy, but from the safety of the product. Because honestly, I'm in my 50s and I'm going to have menopause very soon. Antibiotics, main antibiotics treating cyst has been banned. We have clinical studies with comparison studies in terms of efficacy and positive results of the cranberry. Why was it eliminated?
Allora, il cranberry è stata una lunga storia.
Cranberry was a long story, it's a very complex one. I know Professor Donato is here, and I thank you for being here. And we talked about cranberry.
Ci sei? Eccola, il mio dirigente.
Are you here? My previous manager. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
Allora, Anna Maria, ne abbiamo parlato di cranberry.
We've talked about cranberry, haven't we, Anna Maria? Yes.
Consentitemi innanzitutto un ringraziamento.
Allow me to thank the organizers that asked me to be here with you in this panel. I'm very proud of that. It's a pleasure for me. What about cranberry? What can I say? It has been a very unpleasant experience, and I'm sorry that Salvatore D'Acunto is no more connected with us because the day in which I took part to the regulatory committee in which we had to vote the decision of exclusion, there was a great embarrassment in the room. So we defended it. We did all we could. I had my notes, but actually I didn't need my notes because I was fully convinced of what I was going to say. Only one country, maybe two countries, voted in favor, and the Commission said, we hope that this is going to be the first and the last of these disappointing experiences. As you said, the opinion of the European Medical Agency was quite weak. There were many conditional phrases, but we could not do anything that accept the situation. We do not have a product now. It's not so more available such a product. It's not available as a medical device. And however, we have it under different mask, if you allow me to. It's a food supplement, but it is possible to use it, and it is still available. It was a very embarrassing experience, and I want to say something about the future. These situations will have to be better defined if they will be present in the future. I hope that the competent authorities, they will find the right tools and ways. I know it is a very delicate issue. It is not my role to say that. It is not to Marcella's role to take and make decisions. But we need to be stronger in this sense because we might have other examples like the cranberry one. And we hope that results will be in favor and defending, as Marcella was saying, defending products in which we believe in and that we believed in. And we hope that they will be defended in the future as well.
Anna Maria, è stato un piacere.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me to hear from you as well. What we've done in the past, we really were convinced about our work, and after cranberry, we'll have manos. So I don't think it's an easy life at the moment for these products. Everybody wants them, but nobody knows where to allocate them, where to designate them. Probably the supplement way is the right one. No, we don't know. It's just a way out. If consumers look for these products because they are effective, and the legislator cannot make them drugs and cannot change them into drugs, we have an alternative way to sell them in any way. In my long history in the field of regulation, in the different fields, in the different subjects that I dealt with, it is difficult to put a product in a regulatory area, but also in the free sale. The free sale was the way out, where some products were not defined in a classical way as medical devices, but it was our we were not so much concerned about these aspects because nobody wanted to reach the free sale because the product might have been less certified, less controlled, less looked after. And we didn't want that. And as a competent authority, we didn't want that because if we cannot certify this product as a medical device, you can choose the free sale, which is the less qualified way. The manufacturers themselves don't like this way, but this is the problem. And the expertise that we have in recognizing products, it's us who have introduced the rule about static products. It was a wild field. Wild stakeholders saying that, for example, contact lenses is medical devices if it has certain features, but if it's colored, it's not. So the tattoo, for example, it's not a medical device. We use needles that are medical device, but the coloring tool, the coloring element can be invented in our own homes, in a domestic environment. Or the TENS devices, these are also to fight cellulitis. Somebody didn't want to certify them, and then all of a sudden they were proposed for TENS therapy. So we had many borderline challenges and issues. But when a product has a certain effective outcome, the market recognizes it, safety is guaranteed, then it is correct to put it in a regulatory framework, which has to be an easy one, where it can be traded and put into the market according to that regulatory framework. And we have to be putting a joint effort towards this direction. And we are not defending molecules for someone, but because it could be for us. I know the products. I'm a clinical professional. I have an upside-down question. What about some products that have been labeled as drugs and they are sold as drugs, but they are clearly medical devices? My second question, that kind of product that I'm not mentioning in the different European states is seen in the same way. In Brussels, what about these ones? It's a big question. The first time when I found two similar products, one was a medical device and one was a drug, I was at the beginning. I was talking at the beginning of this issue. It was the first time for me. There was a judge saying if the product is a drug, it's not a medical device. But it was exactly the contrary. The product was a medical device that was commonly registered as drug in the previous years, but it had all the rights to be a medical device. So the question, the provocation is funny, so to say, because the stakeholders in other countries that have drugs, as I was saying in the morning, they are those that reach our political levels and say, in your country, the product is in a regulatory framework which is lower than ours. So take out from the market this product. So this is the competition. These are our competitors. The competition is made by a group of people, group of stakeholders that have done a specific pharmacological or regulatory pattern and way, had to show and demonstrate the quality, the dossier. They created the drugs and they defend it fully. So they try to get rid of the other competitors, the competition, trying to get rid of these medical devices or their drugs. So the filler, for example, filler for knees, it can be a drug. The filler is inserted in the joints for medical reasons. It's been a drug for years. And there were some companies that changed their regulation, but the trend to make a drug swift in the medical device and vice versa is really tough. So you can add something if you want about regulations. I would like to make a remark. I think that we are ready for new change. We're going on in a very slow way. We're lagging behind. There are different scientific committees, pharmacological stakeholders. We are rethinking about the pharmacological mechanisms and effects. We are growing up in a certain way in this new cultural attitude, new approach. We have been talking about this for ages now, but we need time. Another aspect is that some companies, without mentioning them, some multinational companies, but also pharmaceutical national companies, are trying to have a new orientation. They're more they're more orienting themselves towards the medical devices, trying to go hand in hand with the drug. This is a way to see that we are not two different levels. One is at a higher level than the others. These are two different mechanisms, and of course, we cannot forget that competition is part of the game. And when we go and look at the market in other countries, of course, this implies risks, but we have to run this risk. It's worthwhile doing that. The more you are in trying to express your views and opinions, the more we can in Italy. Rule 21 was written with our blood, if you allow me the words, in 2014. So we're fully convinced about that, and someone followed us. We were not alone, fully alone. Thank you. I think that the problem is clear. The world is changing. The possibility to have products that have effective and positive results for different factors, it is quite evident. The mechanisms of action are complex, and we're dealing with a complex issue in terms of pharmacology and chemistry. What I can confirm also, considering the different debates and the in-depth meetings together with the different stakeholders in Amsterdam, is this idea, as the previous ladies said, they are starting to be part of an assessment process, of a new process, a new scientific process that is going to take more in consideration safety in order to avoid that products go out of a market and reach another market in a being in at a lower level, jeopardizing results, and everything has to be assessed in a different way if compared to the past. Today we are at an embryonal stage. We are at the very beginning, but at a community level, European Union level, at regulatory and scientific level, this new attitude, this new approach is starting to gain terrain and is starting to be more and more accepted. And we also want to show and demonstrate that results are positive for patients. Of course, this is a challenge for us. We want to satisfy this challenge and meet the challenge. We will win this challenge, indeed, only if we, as occurred with Rule 21, if we can work together, because we have joint goals: competent authority, protecting safeguard, researchers, doctors, health stakeholders. In the past, we were just looking at things in terms of chemistry. We have to be able to update. We have to be able to be evolving as fast as possible. It's an historical momentum where we have to be more open-minded, and we should understand that we are faced with innovations. And all innovations need to be different and to be out of the traditional framework, the traditional settings. And we're talking exactly about that. So this is a great challenge, because you know better than me that the most difficult thing is to fight against prejudice. And prejudices are not opening our minds, on the contrary. And so we have to fight against prejudices. So another question.
Salve.
Hello. In the morning, we talked about bacteria-resistant agents. So there are some medical devices that are aimed at bacterial therapy. Bacterial therapy is done using medical devices that contain important agents in replacing antibiotics. And this is going to reduce the use of antibiotics in children. The OMS is the World WHO is saying that we have to be careful. But now we don't know what about these medical devices, these products. What about them? We're talking about excellences in Italy. The Yomo Group, for example, and they are creating these products. So the bacteria are fermented in this industrial setting. What do we do with this product? Well, considering that we were saying something, I treated my daughter with these products. Dr. Marabelli said that he treated his wife, so we know these products. We have to fight
to achieve something with this regulation who hasn't found its collocation yet. We cannot sell freely, or we cannot insert any kind of substance in the supplements. So it should be, we should be more, we should engage more the political sphere and also the technical experts to demonstrate the importance, the validity of these products. And so to fight a battle which is not at home, but it's an EU battle. So we have to let everyone understand the importance of these products where other products do not work. So acting in order to reinsert all this in a regulation that might rule and discipline these products. So that's not only my idea, I think that is shared. I think it's the fairest concept. That's not talking about probiotics in general. If we talk about probiotics, we can find endless problems, and we should talk about that. We cannot stop. Faced with the exclusion, we have to work in order to open up new doors for these products. That's my idea. Further question? What role do you see for ethical committees, and how are they cooperating with competent authorities, notified bodies? Ethical committees, what's its role? The role of ethical committees. The role, how are we organizing? Yes, that's a good question, I would say. Ethical committees, or ECs, the Lorenzin law is introducing a change for ECs. There's a whole set of decrees that are exactly in charge of myself. I have to work on these decrees. There's a committee working in IFA instead on ethical committees. It has drafted certain documents. So at this stage, I've submitted these documents to the minister in charge. But you might imagine that with 4,500 amendments on the budget law, this is not a priority. Anyway, the table of the whole value chain on the revision of ethical committee is right now being established. So there is a working group before the fall of the government. So on my table, I have the whole matter that has to be worked on, the already decrees. But after the nightmare of the budget law, we will start working on the ethical committees. It's in interest of everyone because many committees are expiring, and the companies urgently require experimentation and trials, compassionate use even more by the patients, the need to understand whether we should postpone or extend these deadlines, and work on this, of course, is very important. So I feel the pressure on me to act also on as for the ethical committees. Thank you. A question about all these topics. Post-market surveillance. The regulation, as we said, Mrs. Marco Aldi and you and the director, you stressed the importance of clinical evidence. Another breakthrough of the regulation was the legacy products, that is, acquiring the medical devices on the market, getting clinical information on these devices in order to use these devices later on. So I was positively impressed by Professor De Masi talking about the methodology, the assessment, the clinical evaluation that often is extremely important regardless of the mechanism of action. So what can the government do in terms of guidelines, activities that might promote right now in this transitioning time the acquisition of real-life data in the post-market surveillance on marketed devices that could be supported by clinical evidence. At the end of this transitional period. Very good question. The clinical evidence is the brand new topic of the new regulations. We talked for years about the need of medical evidence and clinical evidence, the difference between drug and medical device. And medical device, it was said, it was not supported by clinical evidence. At the same time, right now, all the political decision makers and our national healthcare system, so far beyond from what we are saying this morning, they're all continuing using strategies that, financially speaking, should be based on real-life data, should be supported by evidence-based medicine. So they shall give us these results that would then would underpin the investments by a company and the possibility of this product being attractive because it produces value, so it becomes attractive for the national healthcare system. So it's a cost-benefit HTA assessment that shall be known by the company to invest from today to the future on medical devices, knowing that the National Healthcare Service is increasingly selecting technologies according to these principles. So the new regulations are going on with the need of all medical devices to be recertified according to clinical evidence, and the world that is evolving for the sustainability of the National Healthcare Service and the difficulty of supporting innovation. It's a matter of making a cost-efficacy ratio. I will mention a disruptive example. Yesterday I was at the Senate to talk about CAR-T. And the most peculiar thing, we're talking about technologies for drugs. And so we often talk about drugs and previous experiences. So talking about this drug, we said that for the first time, we had our authority, that's IFA, who negotiated on the payment by result, on the possibility of paying only if there is a result. Obviously, the starting point must be clinical evidence. If our National Healthcare Service, first of all, has to select suitably all the indications, then patients are selected, and then they have to select, in this case, the CAR-T team, the teams working on this evidence. So faced with the clinical evidence, it will pay. If there is no evidence, it's not going to be paid. So the buyer, that's the National Healthcare Service, our state, from now on, once it has to analyze a very innovative technology, being a device or a drug, will make no difference. It will decide to pay or to buy. So to buy, first of all, only those products that are cost efficiently and with results. So without real-world data or clinical evidence, this product will not have this HTA new future that is going beyond silos and all the different reasonings that are made every day in terms of healthcare economy. Companies, on the other hand, have to decide to invest on a product only when they are certain of the evidence of the result. So what have we done? The I Institute of Health is working in agreement with my Ministry of Health on a national program for clinical evidence. Me, myself, I insist a lot on the need to have a national clinical evidence plan, because on the one hand, we have, of course, outstanding hospitals that are excellencies and cutting-edge institutes that can perform studies, and on the other hand, we have the need to get added value results and clinical evidence that would allow us to reinvest in this product, both from the side of the company and the national healthcare system. So we insist in carrying on in this regard to have evidence-based, clinical evidence-based programs to be included in our research. Also because we want to retain researchers, so we are meeting different objectives. So we've talked with the Minister of Clinical Excellences, Research. We organized a table a few days ago precisely on this. Another very important topic I'm studying right now, quite interesting, is the early feasibility studies that are being conducted in the US to establish beforehand if a device will have a future. So deciding to perform feasibility studies, as we call them, that it's a sort of phase 1 out of 6, 7 patients to see the safety and tolerability of the device beforehand, so that the company can understand whether that study could lead to a safe and efficient device, and the authority can understand, if it's not going to be just a pilot study, if to give this possibility could be of help for the healthcare national system that has to invest on the efficacy and certainty of the quality, safeness, and innovation of these devices. So it's a wide, broad answer, and I'm sorry if it's not precisely in line with the topic, but it's quite interesting.
Bene.
Well, if there are no other questions, I would say once again that we are perfectly on time. Let me warmly thank all the speakers, Mrs. Donato, who played us honor with her contribution, as she always does. It was very relevant. Thanks to all of you. In the afternoon, we will have the second session that regards, again, the MDMS world. We will talk about VAT, which is not trivial. We will share opinions with European speakers, as it is self-evident that this fight, this battle is conducted in Europe, most of all. So this sharing of experiences, it's a must. So I hope I will rejoin you here this afternoon. Thanks again, and good lunch.